The evening sun cast long shadows across the Korean hillside as Captain James Mitchell stood tall in the commander's hatch of his M46 Patton tank. His weathered face turned toward the fading light, eyes scanning the distant ridge where rice paddies met the darkening sky. At 48 years old, Mitchell had seen more wars than most men should in a lifetime. His fingers, calloused and strong, gripped the cold metal of the hatch as memories of another war, another time, flickered through his mind. Bastogne, 1944. The biting cold that cut through even the thickest coats. German panthers advancing through the snow-covered forest. The desperate defense when no one believed they could hold. But they did hold against impossible odds. Mitchell and his Sherman tank crew had taken out 3 panthers in that single firefight, saving what remained of their company when they were completely surrounded. Now here he was, 7 years later, standing in the commander's position of a different tank in a different war on the other side of the world. Korea, a place he had barely heard of before being deployed here. The sunlight caught the small golden band on his left hand, a brief glimmer that pulled his thoughts home to Margaret. 23 years of marriage, most of them spent apart. Mitchell's gaze drifted across the 5 tanks under his command, spread in defensive positions across the hillside. Each M46 Patton represented American industrial might, each one housing a crew of men who trusted him with their lives. His own tank, which the crew had christened Steel Thunder, stood ready as always, its 90mm main gun aimed toward the valley below. The radio crackled with a message from base camp. Eagle 6 to Thunder 1, come in. Mitchell reached down and grabbed the handset. Thunder 1 here, go ahead Eagle 6. Captain Mitchell, report to command immediately. Lieutenant Colonel Patterson wants to see you ASAP. Copy that, on my way. As Mitchell climbed down from the tank, he nodded to his gunner, Sergeant Robert Bobby Anderson, a 29-year-old from Nebraska with eyes that could spot a target at impossible ranges. Bobby, I've been called to command. Keep an eye on things while I'm gone. Anderson nodded, his lean face serious. Yes, sir. We'll be ready when you get back. The walk to command took Mitchell past rows of tents and the occasional bunker. Soldiers saluted as he passed, many of them barely old enough to shave. Kids fighting men's wars. It had been the same in the last war, too. The command tent stood on a small plateau, American flags fluttering outside. As Mitchell approached, he could see Lieutenant Colonel William Patterson pacing outside, hands clasped behind his back. Patterson was West Point, career military, and ambitious. At 40, he already had his eyes on becoming a full colonel, maybe even a general someday. He stopped pacing when he saw Mitchell approaching. Captain, good of you to join me. Patterson didn't extend his hand, instead motioning Mitchell to follow him inside the tent. Maps covered the central table, marked with unit positions and suspected enemy movements. Patterson picked up a folder and handed it to Mitchell. These are your new orders, Captain, straight from Division HQ. Mitchell opened the folder and scanned the contents, his eyes widening slightly as he read. Sir, is this accurate? I'm being rotated home in 3 weeks. Patterson nodded. That's correct. 20 years of service. You've earned your retirement, Captain Mitchell. There was a pause before he continued. But before that happens, I have one final mission for you. What might be the most important one of your career? Mitchell waited silently as Patterson moved to the map and pointed to a small hill marked as Objective 468. This high ground controls access to the entire valley and the main supply route to Heartbreak Ridge. Intelligence suggests that the North Koreans and Chinese are massing armor for a major push through this sector. We believe they have at least 30 T-34-85 tanks from the 115th Armor Regiment moving into position. Mitchell studied the map closely, taking in the terrain features, noting the approaches and potential defensive positions. And our mission, sir? Your mission is simple, Captain. Hold that hill at all costs. Your tank platoon will be the backbone of our defense. Mitchell nodded, already calculating odds and possibilities in his mind. When do we move out? Tomorrow at 0600. Patterson hesitated, then added, There's one more thing, Captain. I was going to wait to tell you this, but since these are your final orders, he pulled another folder from his desk and handed it to Mitchell. This arrived for you today. Mitchell opened it to find a letter from home, the handwriting unmistakably Margaret's, along with a photograph of her and their daughter Claire, now 19 and looking so much like her mother. I'll give you a moment, Patterson said, stepping outside. Mitchell's fingers trembled slightly as he unfolded the letter. My dearest Jim, it began. Claire and I are counting the days until you come home. The apple trees you planted before you left are finally bearing fruit. Claire has been accepted to nursing school. She's becoming a fine young woman, but she misses her father terribly. As do I. 2 years is too long without you. Come home to us safely. All my love, Margaret. Mitchell carefully folded the letter and tucked it into his breast pocket, close to his heart. He walked outside to where Patterson waited. Thank you for that, sir. Patterson nodded, then checked his watch. Get some rest, Captain. Tomorrow will be a long day. As Mitchell turned to leave, Patterson added, and Captain, make this last mission count. Make it one they'll remember you by. Back at the tank position, Mitchell found his crew gathered around a small fire, heating coffee in tin cups. Besides Anderson, there was Sergeant Thomas Doc Wilson, the 24-year-old loader whose hands moved with surgical precision, Corporal Samuel Sammy Johnson, the baby-faced 21-year-old driver who could make the 46-ton tank dance like a ballerina, and Staff Sergeant David Carter, the 26-year-old radio man whose father had served with Mitchell in Europe. Carter stood at attention as Mitchell approached, but the captain waved him down. At ease, Dave, just checking in before turning in. Carter relaxed slightly, but his posture remained military straight. Everything quiet, sir. No movement on the perimeter. Mitchell nodded, studying Carter's face. The young man was the spitting image of his father, Mark Carter, who had pushed Mitchell out of the way of a German 88 shell and taken the blast himself during the Battle of the Bulge. Mitchell had promised the dying man that he'd look after his son, a promise he'd kept by staying in touch with the family over the years. When young David had enlisted and eventually ended up in Korea, Mitchell had pulled strings to get him assigned to his tank crew. Your father would be proud of you, Dave, Mitchell said quietly. Carter's expression softened momentarily. Thank you, sir. That means a lot. Mitchell was about to say more when the sound of an approaching jeep interrupted them. The vehicle came to a stop nearby, and a tall figure in a crisp uniform stepped out, looking around as if inspecting the position. Even in the fading light, the captain's bars on his collar gleamed. Heads up, Anderson muttered. Looks like we've got company from HQ. The newcomer strode confidently toward them, a leather map case tucked under one arm. Behind him, a second jeep arrived carrying 4 more soldiers. Captain James Mitchell? The man extended his hand. Captain Richard Lawson, Armored Development Command. I've been looking forward to meeting the legendary tank killer of Bastogne. Mitchell shook the offered hand, taking the measure of the man before him. Lawson was younger, perhaps 32, with the confident bearing of a West Point graduate. His uniform was too clean, too pressed for someone who'd spent time in actual combat. What can we do for you, Captain Lawson? Mitchell asked, keeping his tone neutral. Lawson smiled broadly. Captain, I'm here to do something for you, or rather, we're here to work together. He turned and gestured toward the second jeep, where his men were removing a tarp from a large crate. We've brought you something that's going to change the way this war is fought. Mitchell's eyes narrowed as he caught sight of what was being unloaded. Even in the gathering darkness, he could make out the distinctive shape of a tank turret, different from the familiar profile of the M46. Is that what I think it is? Anderson asked, stepping forward for a better look. Lawson's smile widened. Gentlemen, to meet the future of American armor. The M47 Patton, fresh from Aberdeen Proving Grounds. She's here for field testing under combat conditions, and Lieutenant Colonel Patterson has graciously agreed to let us join your mission to Objective 468. Mitchell studied the new tank as Lawson's crew continued to uncrate parts and equipment. The M47 did indeed look impressive with its sleeker turret design and improved fire control system. But Mitchell had been in the Army long enough to know that new didn't always mean better, especially when the bullets started flying. With all due respect, Captain Lawson, we're not headed out for a parade ground demonstration. We're moving into a hot zone with confirmed enemy armor presence. Lawson's expression hardened slightly. I'm well aware of the mission parameters, Captain Mitchell. The M47 may be new, but she's combat ready. In fact, her improved stabilization system and fire control will give us a significant advantage over those outdated T-34s. The way he emphasized outdated made it clear what he thought about the M46 Pattons that Mitchell's platoon operated, and perhaps about their older commander as well. Mitchell kept his face impassive. I'm sure the new tank has its merits, but there's no substitute for combat experience, which my men have in abundance. Experience is valuable, Lawson conceded, but so is innovation. The Army is changing, Captain. New technologies, new tactics. What worked at Bastogne won't necessarily work against a modern enemy. The statement hung in the air, a challenge that Mitchell chose not to answer directly. Instead, he nodded toward the new tank. Will you be commanding the M47 yourself, Captain? I will indeed. I've personally overseen its development for the past 18 months. No one knows her capabilities better than I do. Mitchell studied the younger officer for a moment longer, then nodded. Well then, Captain Lawson, I suggest you and your crew get some rest. We move out at Oaks 100 tomorrow. As Lawson returned to his men, Anderson moved closer to Mitchell. What do you make of him, sir? Mitchell watched the younger captain directing his crew with animated gestures. He's green, smart probably, but green, and that can get people killed out here. The night brought little rest for Mitchell. After briefing his tank commanders on the next day's mission, he returned to his tent and spread out his maps under the dim light of a kerosene lamp. Hill 468 was a commanding position, but it was also vulnerable from several approaches if the enemy knew the terrain, and Mitchell suspected they did. He was still studying the maps when there was a soft rustle at the entrance of his tent. Captain, may I come in? Mitchell recognized Carter's voice. Enter. The young radio man stepped inside, his expression troubled. Sorry to disturb you, sir, but there's something I needed to discuss privately. Mitchell gestured to the folding chair across from him. Have a seat, Dave. What's on your mind? Carter sat stiffly, his hands clasped together. It's about tomorrow's mission, sir. I've been listening to some of the radio traffic from forward positions. There are reports of unusually heavy enemy activity in the sector we're headed to, more than just the tank regiment that HQ mentioned. Mitchell wasn't surprised. Intelligence reports were often incomplete. What specifically are they reporting? At least 2 companies of infantry accompanying the armor, sir, and several anti-tank gun emplacements already dug in on the approaches to Hill 468. Mitchell nodded, marking the potential positions on his map. Thank you for bringing this to me, Dave, but that's not really what's bothering you, is it? Carter looked down at his hands. No, sir, it's... He hesitated, then looked up. Tomorrow will be my first major engagement. I know I've been in combat before, but nothing like what we're headed into. I don't want to let you down or dishonor my father's memory. Mitchell's expression softened. Dave, your father was one of the bravest men I ever knew, but even he was scared before a big fight. We all are. Courage isn't about not feeling fear. It's about doing what needs to be done despite that fear. He leaned forward. And as for letting me down, not possible. I've watched you grow from a boy into the fine soldier you are today. Your father would be as proud of you as I am. Carter straightened in his chair, his shoulders squaring. Thank you, sir. That means everything coming from you. After Carter left, Mitchell returned to his maps, but his mind kept wandering to the newcomer, Captain Lawson, and his state-of-the-art tank. There was something troubling about the timing of their arrival, just as Mitchell was preparing for his final mission. It felt too coincidental, too convenient. His suspicions were confirmed the next morning when he was summoned to another meeting with Lieutenant Colonel Patterson. This time Lawson was present, standing confidently by the map table as if he belonged there. Mitchell, good. We were just discussing the approach to Objective 468. Patterson's tone was unusually animated. Captain Lawson has some interesting tactical suggestions based on the capabilities of the M47. Mitchell noted the use of Lawson's suggestions rather than his own experience. He kept his expression neutral as he approached the map table. Lawson immediately launched into his presentation, pointing to various positions on the map. Based on the improved mobility and fire control of the M47, I believe we should take a more aggressive posture than originally planned. Instead of setting up defensive positions on Hill 468, we should use it as a staging area for a direct assault on the enemy armor. Mitchell couldn't hide his surprise. An assault? With 5 M46 tanks and 1 experimental M47 against a reinforced enemy armor regiment? That's a suicide mission. Lawson's expression tightened. Not if we use the element of surprise and the superior technology of the M47. My tank can lead the charge, with your platoon providing supporting fire. We can catch the enemy while they're still assembling their forces before they're ready to attack. Mitchell turned to Patterson. Sir, with all due respect, this plan ignores everything we know about the enemy's capabilities in the terrain. They have anti-tank positions already established and infantry support. A frontal assault would be playing directly into their hands. Patterson looked uncomfortable, glancing between the 2 captains. Captain Mitchell makes a valid point about the risks, Lawson. All combat operations involve risk, Colonel, Lawson replied smoothly. But consider the opportunity here. If we successfully demonstrate the M47's capabilities in a decisive engagement, it could accelerate full-scale production. That would mean better equipment for all our men in the field, potentially saving countless lives in the long run. Mitchell realized then what was happening. This wasn't about the best tactical approach. It was about showcasing the new tank. And Patterson, always with an eye on advancement, saw an opportunity to attach his name to a success story. "Colonel," Mitchell said firmly, "my primary concern is the safety of our men and the success of our mission, not providing a demonstration platform for new equipment." Patterson's expression hardened. "Your concerns are noted, Captain Mitchell. However, after consideration of all factors, I've decided to approve Captain Lawson's plan. You will coordinate with him to execute an assault from Hill 468 at 0800 hours tomorrow." Mitchell knew that further argument would be futile. "Yes, sir." "Good. That will be all, gentlemen. Prepare your men and equipment. I expect a successful operation." Outside the command tent, Lawson caught up to Mitchell. "I understand your reservations, Captain, but this is the direction the Army is moving. Forward, not backward. Embrace it." Mitchell stopped and turned to face the younger officer. "Let me give you some advice, Captain Lawson. Since you seem to be short on it, tanks aren't won or lost by technology alone. They're won by the men inside them. Their training, their experience, their judgment. Your M47 might be a marvel of engineering, but if you lead those men into an ambush, all that technology won't save them." Lawson's confident smile faltered for the first time. "I appreciate the concern, Captain Mitchell, but I assure you I've thoroughly analyzed the situation. This is the right move." Mitchell stepped closer, his voice dropping to ensure only Lawson could hear. "Have you ever seen a man burned to death inside a tank, Captain? Have you heard those screams? I have, more times than I care to remember, and I promised myself a long time ago that I would never send men into that kind of hell unless there was no other choice." Without waiting for a response, Mitchell walked away, his mind already racing with contingency plans. Because regardless of what Patterson had ordered or what Lawson believed, Mitchell would not lead his men into a slaughter without a backup plan. When he returned to the tank position, his crew could immediately sense his mood. "Bad news, Captain?" Anderson asked as Mitchell approached. "Change of plans," Mitchell replied grimly. "Gather the other tank commanders. We need to talk." Within minutes, the 5 tank commanders of Mitchell's platoon had assembled around a makeshift sand table that Johnson had created, showing the terrain around Hill 468. Mitchell outlined the new orders, not hiding his concerns. "This is the official plan," he concluded, "but I want each of you to be prepared for it to go sideways. If that happens, we fall back to our original defensive strategy. Is that understood?" The tank commanders nodded solemnly. They trusted Mitchell's judgment, earned through years of combat experience. "What about Captain Lawson and the new tank?" asked Lieutenant Parker, one of the more experienced tank commanders. "The M47 will be taking point, which means we need to be ready to provide covering fire if they run into trouble." Mitchell looked around at the faces of his commanders. "I don't care what anyone says about new technology. We stick together out there. We protect each other. That's how we all come home." As the tank commanders dispersed to brief their crews, Carter approached Mitchell. "Sir, I've just received updated weather reports. Heavy cloud cover expected tomorrow morning. Visibility will be limited." Mitchell nodded thoughtfully. "That could work in our favor if things go bad. Make sure all crews have their signal flares ready. If we get separated in poor visibility, that might be our only way to coordinate." Throughout the rest of the day, Mitchell moved from tank to tank, checking equipment, answering questions, and offering words of encouragement to the men. Each crew was unique with its own dynamics and personalities, but all shared a common bond forged through months of combat together. At Steel Thunder, Mitchell found his crew performing final maintenance checks. Anderson was calibrating the gun sight, Wilson was organizing the ammunition storage, Johnson was checking the engine, and Carter was testing the radio equipment. "How are we looking?" Mitchell asked. "Ready as we'll ever be, sir." "Ever be, sir," Anderson replied, not looking up from his task. "Just finished adjusting the elevation mechanism. Should be dead on target now." Wilson emerged from the turret, wiping grease from his hands. "Ammo load is complete. 90 rounds of 90mm, mix of armor-piercing and high-explosive as ordered." Johnson closed the engine compartment. "Engine's purring like a kitten, Captain. New filters installed and fluids topped off." Carter was the last to report. "Radio check complete, sir. All frequencies operational." Mitchell nodded, satisfied with their preparations, if not with the mission itself. "Good work, all of you. Get some food and rest while you can. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the camp, Mitchell found a quiet spot on a nearby ridge to watch the fading light. From this vantage point, he could see the valley below and the hill they would be fighting for tomorrow. In the distance, barely visible, were the enemy positions, marked by occasional movement and the faint glow of cook fires. The sound of approaching footsteps made him turn. It was Lawson, also seemingly drawn to this observation point. "Quite a view," the younger captain remarked, coming to stand beside Mitchell. Mitchell nodded without speaking, his eyes returning to the landscape before them. "I wanted to apologize for any offense earlier," Lawson said after a moment. "I know you have concerns about the plan, and I respect that, but I truly believe this is our best chance to strike a decisive blow." Mitchell considered his words carefully before responding. "You know what I see when I look out there, Captain Lawson? I see the same thing I saw in the Ardennes in '44, and in North Africa before that. Good ground for a defensive action, terrible ground for an assault. The enemy has the high positions, they know we're coming, and they have anti-tank guns already in place." He turned to look directly at Lawson. "What I don't understand is why you're so determined to risk everything on this attack. What's really driving this?" Lawson's confident facade cracked slightly. "You want the truth? This mission could make my career. A successful demonstration of the M47 under combat conditions, especially in an offensive role, would fast-track the program, and the officer who led that demonstration would be remembered. Even if it costs lives? It won't. The M47 is that good, Captain. Its armor can withstand hits that would destroy an M46. Its gun can penetrate a T-34 at ranges your tanks can only dream of. This isn't just about my career, it's about bringing better equipment to our fighting men." Mitchell sighed. "I hope you're right, for all our sakes. But remember this, out there when the shells start flying, all that matters is the men beside you and the decisions you make in the moment. No technology can replace good judgment." As darkness fell completely, both men returned to their respective positions to prepare for what was to come. Mitchell spent additional time with each of his tank commanders, going over contingency plans and emergency procedures. He wanted to leave nothing to chance. Finally, with all preparations complete, Mitchell returned to his tent. He took out Margaret's letter again, reading it by lamplight. His fingers traced over the photograph of his wife and daughter, memorizing their faces as if he might forget them. Then he sat down and began to write his own letter home, just in case. "My dearest Margaret," he began, "by the time you receive this, I will either be on my way home to you or I will have given my last full measure in service to our country. Either way, know that my thoughts in these final hours of my military service are of you and Claire, and the life we will build together when I return." He wrote for almost an hour, pouring out his heart in a way he rarely allowed himself to do. When finished, he sealed the letter and gave it to his trusted friend, the company chaplain, with instructions to mail it only if he didn't return from tomorrow's mission. Dawn broke gray and misty, just as the weather reports had predicted. Visibility was limited to a few hundred yards, with the promise of clearing later in the morning. Mitchell's platoon of M46 Patton tanks, along with Lawson's M47, moved out at 0600 as ordered, advancing cautiously toward Objective 468. Mitchell stood in the commander's hatch of Steel Thunder, scanning the terrain ahead through binoculars. The mist swirled around the moving tanks, occasionally giving glimpses of the hill that was their destination. Inside the tank, his crew worked with practiced efficiency, each man focused on his task. "Maintain formation," Mitchell ordered over the radio. "Keep visual contact with the tanks to your left and right. This mist is perfect for an ambush." They reached the base of Hill 468 without incident and began the ascent, engines straining against the incline. As they neared the top, Mitchell ordered the tanks to spread out into defensive positions, securing the high ground as the first phase of their mission. Lawson's M47, its newer engine handling the climb with ease, took position at the center of the line. The younger captain emerged from his hatch as soon as they reached the summit. "All units in position, Captain Mitchell," he reported, a note of excitement in his voice. "The mist is starting to clear. We should have visual on the enemy positions soon." Mitchell nodded, still scanning the terrain below. The valley spread out before them, patches becoming visible as the morning sun began to burn away the mist. In the distance, he could make out movement, the distinctive silhouettes of T-34 tanks assembling in what appeared to be a staging area. I count at least 15 T-34s in the open, Mitchell reported, with more likely concealed in that tree line to the east. Lawson joined him in observation, raising his own binoculars. I see them. They're forming up for an attack, just as we anticipated. This is perfect. The M47's fire control system can target them effectively even at this range. Mitchell wasn't convinced. The enemy formation seemed too obvious, too exposed. It could be a trap. Those visible tanks might be bait to draw us down from our defensive position. Lawson shook his head. Or it could be our opportunity to strike before they're fully assembled. The plan calls for us to begin our assault at 800. That's 20 minutes from now. Mitchell continued to study the enemy positions, something nagging at the back of his mind. The T-34s were indeed moving into what appeared to be an attack formation, but there was something off about their positioning. They were too spread out, too visible. Then he noticed something the reconnaissance reports hadn't mentioned. A small ridge running parallel to their position, perfect for concealing anti-tank guns. And the T-34s were positioned to draw any attacking force directly into that kill zone. Captain Lawson, Mitchell said urgently, I strongly recommend we reconsider the assault. I believe the enemy has prepared an ambush along that ridge to the west. If we advance as planned, we'll be caught in a crossfire. Lawson lowered his binoculars, his expression hardening. Your caution is noted, Captain Mitchell, but the plan stands. The M47's superior range will allow us to engage the enemy before we enter their effective fire zone. And the anti-tank guns I suspect are hidden along that ridge. They'll be well within range to hit our flank as we advance. Speculation. We have no confirmation of anti-tank emplacements there, because the reconnaissance couldn't get close enough without being spotted. But I've seen this setup before in the Ardennes. It's a classic ambush position. Their debate was interrupted by a radio call from Lieutenant Colonel Patterson. Eagle 6 to Thunder 1 in Sabre 1, status report. Lawson responded first. Sabre 1 here. We're in position on objective 468 with visual confirmation of enemy armor assembling in the valley. Preparing to commence assault at 800 as planned. Thunder 1 here, Mitchell added. Request permission to delay assault until we can confirm absence of anti-tank positions on the western ridge. I have reason to believe the enemy has prepared an ambush. There was a pause before Patterson's response came. Thunder 1, what evidence do you have of these supposed anti-tank positions? Mitchell knew how weak his position was. No direct visual confirmation, sir. But the enemy tank formation is positioned in a way that suggests they're trying to draw us into a trap. And the terrain on that ridge provides perfect concealment for anti-tank guns. Another pause. Based on available intelligence and direct observation, the assault will proceed as planned. Captain Lawson will take point with the M47. Captain Mitchell, your platoon will follow in support formation. Eagle 6 out. Lawson turned to Mitchell, a hint of triumph in his expression. You heard the colonel. Prepare your men, Captain. We move in 15 minutes. As Lawson returned to his tank, Mitchell gathered his tank commanders for a final briefing. The assault will proceed as ordered, he told them grimly. But I want everyone on high alert for hidden anti-tank positions on that western ridge. If I give the order to abort and retreat, you execute immediately. Is that understood? The commanders nodded solemnly. Good. Now get to your tanks, and may God be with us all. As Mitchell climbed back into the commander's position of Steel Thunder, he caught the worried expression on Carter's face. You heard all that? Mitchell asked. Carter nodded. Yes, sir. Do you really think it's a trap? Mitchell looked out over the valley one more time, at the enemy tanks now clearly visible in the clearing mist. Everything in his gut told him they were riding into disaster. Yes, I do, but orders are orders. Just stay sharp and be ready to relay my commands exactly as I give them. At precisely 0800 hours, the 6 American tanks began their advance down the slope of Hill 468, with Lawson's M47 in the lead. Mitchell had positioned his M46 platoon in a V formation behind the newer tank, ready to provide covering fire if needed. As they descended into the valley, Mitchell continued to scan the western ridge for any sign of the anti-tank positions he suspected were there. The morning mist had largely burned away now, giving them clear visibility of the battlefield ahead. The enemy T-34s had begun to move as well, advancing in what appeared to be a direct confrontation course. But still, something felt wrong to Mitchell. The enemy commander was being too obvious, too predictable. They were halfway across the valley when Mitchell's fears were confirmed. A flash from the western ridge, followed by the distinctive sound of an anti-tank gun firing. The shell missed Lawson's M47 by meters, exploding in the ground nearby. Anti-tank guns on the ridge, Mitchell shouted into his radio. All tanks, evasive action. More guns opened fire from concealed positions along the ridge, creating a deadly crossfire across their advance route. At the same time, the T-34s accelerated their approach, their own guns beginning to fire. Mitchell watched in horror as one of his M46 tanks, commanded by Lieutenant Reynolds, took a direct hit from an anti-tank gun. The shell penetrated the front armor, and moments later, the tank erupted in flames as its ammunition cooked off. Fall back, all tanks, fall back to Hill 468, Mitchell ordered, his voice steady despite the chaos erupting around them. But it was too late for an orderly retreat. A second M46 was hit, its track blown off, immobilizing it in the open. The crew bailed out under heavy fire, running for what little cover they could find. Lawson's M47, despite being the primary target, was still advancing. Its thicker armor withstanding hits that would have destroyed an M46. But then Mitchell saw a T-34 emerge from a concealed position directly in the M47's path, at point-blank range. The two tanks fired almost simultaneously. The M47's shell struck the T-34 dead center, destroying it instantly. But the T-34's round also found its mark, hitting the M47's turret ring. The new tank shuddered to a halt, smoke beginning to pour from the damaged turret. Lawson's been hit, Carter reported. They're still alive, but the tank is disabled. Mitchell made a split-second decision. Johnson, bring us alongside the M47. Anderson, provide covering fire for the crew evacuation. As Steel Thunder maneuvered toward the stricken M47, Anderson's 90mm gun roared repeatedly, targeting enemy positions on the ridge and any T-34s that came into view. When they reached Lawson's tank, Mitchell could see the crew struggling to escape the smoking vehicle. The main hatch was jammed from the hit they'd taken. Carter, take the gun. Wilson, help me get them out. Mitchell and his loader climbed out of their tank, exposing themselves to enemy fire as they moved to assist Lawson's crew. Using a pry bar from their own emergency kit, they managed to force open the damaged hatch. Lawson emerged first, his face blackened with soot, a deep cut across his forehead, bleeding freely. Mitchell helped him across to Steel Thunder, then returned for the rest of the crew. The gunner was badly wounded, unconscious and bleeding heavily from a shrapnel wound to his leg. With all of Lawson's crew safely transferred to Mitchell's tank, they began their retreat back toward Hill 468. The two remaining M46s of Mitchell's platoon provided covering fire, making their own fighting withdrawals. Get us back to the hill, Mitchell ordered Johnson. Maximum speed. As they retreated, Mitchell could see the full extent of the disaster unfolding. 2 of his 5 tanks destroyed, Lawson's M47 disabled, and enemy forces still advancing. The mission had failed exactly as he had feared it would. But there was no time for recrimination now. They needed to reach the defensive positions on Hill 468 before they were completely overrun. When they finally made it back to the hilltop, Mitchell immediately organized what remained of their force. The wounded were transferred to a medical jeep that had arrived with reinforcements, including Lawson, who protested being evacuated. "This isn't over, Captain," Lawson said, his voice shaky but determined. "We can still turn this around." Mitchell looked at the younger officer, seeing for the first time the fear behind the bravado. "Your part is over for now, Captain. Get that head wound treated. We'll talk after." As Lawson was helped into the medical jeep, Mitchell turned to face the valley below. The enemy forces were regrouping, clearly preparing for an assault on the hill. They had walked into a trap exactly as he had feared, but the real battle was just beginning. With 3 functioning tanks and reinforcements from the infantry company that had arrived to support their position, Mitchell began preparing for the defense of Hill 468. Despite the disastrous beginning, he was determined that this final mission would not end in defeat. Patterson's voice crackled over the radio, demanding an update. Mitchell reported the situation honestly but succinctly. Thunder 1 to Eagle 6. Assault repulsed with heavy losses. 2 M46s destroyed, M47 disabled. We've withdrawn to objective and are preparing defensive positions. Enemy armor preparing to attack our position. Estimated strength 20 plus T-34s with infantry support. Patterson's response was terse. Hold position. Reinforcements en route. Air support in 30 minutes. Mitchell knew that 30 minutes might as well be an eternity in the face of the coming attack. But he had defended hopeless positions before and lived to tell the tale. This final mission would be no different. He would hold this hill or die trying. As he surveyed their defensive setup, Mitchell caught sight of Carter standing nearby, awaiting orders but clearly shaken by the morning's events. "Dave," Mitchell said gently, "your father faced worse odds at Bastogne. And do you know what he told me then?" Carter shook his head. He said, "The difference between victory and defeat isn't about numbers or equipment. It's about who wants it more and who's willing to be smarter about how they fight." Mitchell placed a hand on the young man's shoulder. "We're outgunned and outnumbered, but we're not outfought. Not yet." Carter straightened, his resolve visibly strengthening. "What's the plan, sir?" Mitchell smiled grimly, turning back to face the valley where enemy forces were gathering. "The plan? We're going to show these people what happens when they corner old soldiers who aren't ready to die just yet." In the valley below, the first wave of T-34 tanks began to advance toward Hill 468, their engines roaring like distant thunder. Captain James Mitchell, in what he knew might be his final battle, stood ready to meet them. The sun, now high overhead, cast no shadows as Mitchell surveyed the approaching enemy. This wasn't how he had imagined his final mission would unfold. But as he watched his men prepare for the coming fight, a strange calm settled over him. Whatever happened in the hours ahead, he would face it as he had faced every battle, with courage, with skill, and with the absolute determination to bring his men home alive. The real test was just beginning. Twilight settled over Hill 468 as Captain James Mitchell watched the distant flickers of enemy campfires in the valley below. The failed assault had cost them dearly: 2 M46 tanks destroyed, Lawson's experimental M47 disabled, and 7 good men wounded or dead. But the hill remained in American hands, at least for now. Mitchell stood at the edge of their hastily fortified position, his weathered face illuminated by the last rays of sunlight. Nearby, the surviving tanks were positioned in defensive formations, their gun barrels pointed toward the likely avenues of approach. Infantry foxholes dotted the hillside, manned by soldiers from the reinforcement company that had arrived after the morning's disaster. "Sir," Sergeant Anderson approached, his tall frame silhouetted against the darkening sky. "All tanks are resupplied and ready. Ammo loads are complete." Mitchell nodded without turning. "How's our fuel situation?" "Three-quarter tanks all around. Enough for what's coming." What was coming? The words hung in the air between them. Everyone on the hill knew the North Koreans would attack again, likely under cover of darkness. The only questions were when and with what force. "Bobby," Mitchell said, using Anderson's first name as he rarely did, "get some rest while you can. I need my best gunner sharp tonight." Anderson hesitated. "With respect, sir, you should take your own advice. You haven't closed your eyes since before the assault this morning." Mitchell finally turned to face his gunner, a faint smile crossing his lips. 20 years in armor, and I've never been able to sleep before a fight. Not about to start now." He clapped Anderson on the shoulder. "But I appreciate the concern. Go on now. I'll wake you if anything changes." As Anderson walked away, Mitchell returned his gaze to the valley. 20 years. From a young tanker in North Africa to a tank company commander in the frozen forests of Bastogne, and now here on a nameless hill in Korea for what would likely be his final battle. So many memories, so many men lost along the way. His hand unconsciously moved to his breast pocket, where Margaret's letter rested close to his heart. After this, after Korea, he would go home to her and to Claire. Plant more apple trees, watch his daughter become a nurse. Grow old in peace, if such a thing were possible for a man who had seen what he had seen. If they survived the night, the sound of approaching footsteps broke his reverie. He turned to see Staff Sergeant Carter making his way up the slope, a steaming mug in his hand. "Coffee, sir," Carter said, offering the mug. "Cook says it might be the last hot brew for a while." Mitchell accepted the mug gratefully. "Thank you, Dave." Carter remained standing beside him, looking out over the valley. "Beautiful country, isn't it? Hard to believe people are killing each other over it." Mitchell sipped the coffee, letting its warmth spread through him. People have been killing each other over beautiful country since the beginning of time. Doesn't make it any less beautiful, just more tragic. They stood in companionable silence for a moment, captain and radio man, mentor and protege, the older man who had promised a dying father to look after his son, and the younger who had grown up hearing stories of the legendary tank commander who had held the line at Bastogne. "Sir," Carter said finally, his voice low, "the men are talking. About this morning. About Captain Lawson and the M47. Mitchell waited, letting Carter find his words. "They're saying you warned him, that you knew it was a trap, and he wouldn't listen." Carter paused. "They're also saying Lieutenant Colonel Patterson sided with him over you because of the new tank." What men say among themselves is their business, Mitchell replied carefully. What matters now is what's in front of us, not behind us. Carter persisted. But if you were right about the ambush, sir, shouldn't HQ know? Shouldn't someone be held accountable? Mitchell turned to face the young sergeant directly. Dave, in war, being right isn't always enough. Sometimes the wrong decision gets made for what seem like good reasons at the time. What matters now is how we respond. He gestured toward the valley. Those men down there don't care who was right or wrong this morning. They only care about taking this hill, and our job is to make sure they don't. The radio on Carter's belt crackled to life. Command to Thunder 1, come in. Carter handed the handset to Mitchell. Thunder 1 here. Captain Mitchell, report to the command post immediately. Lieutenant Colonel Patterson has arrived on site. Mitchell handed the mug back to Carter. Looks like the morning's mistakes are catching up with us after all. Keep an eye on things here. I'll be back as soon as I can. The command post had been established in a bunker near the reverse slope of the hill, offering protection from enemy observation and artillery. As Mitchell entered, he found Patterson bent over a map table, his face illuminated by a single kerosene lamp. Captain Lawson was there too, his head now bandaged, but apparently deemed fit enough to return to duty. Captain Mitchell reporting as ordered, sir, Mitchell announced, standing at attention. Patterson looked up, his expression unreadable in the dim light. At ease, Captain. We were just discussing the current situation. Mitchell relaxed marginally, noting the tension in the room. The men are in position, sir. We're as ready as we can be with the resources available. Patterson nodded. Good, because intelligence suggests the enemy is preparing a major push tonight. Prisoner reports indicate they've brought up their entire 115th Armor Regiment, plus additional infantry support. That would put them at approximately 30 tanks, sir, plus however many anti-tank guns they've positioned along that western ridge. 31 to be precise, Lawson interjected, pointing to aerial reconnaissance photos spread on the table. These were taken 2 hours ago. They show a concentration of T-34-85s here, in this valley, with more arriving. They're planning to overwhelm us with numbers. Mitchell studied the photos. The enemy force was indeed substantial, far larger than their own depleted units could hope to match in a straight fight. What are your orders, sir? Mitchell asked, addressing Patterson. The lieutenant colonel straightened, squaring on his shoulders. Hold this position at all costs. Hill 468 is the linchpin of our entire defensive line in this sector. If it falls, the enemy will have a clear route to our supply depots and field hospitals. And our resources, sir? What you see is what you have, Captain. The 3 remaining tanks from your platoon, the infantry company currently dug in, and whatever can be salvaged from Captain Lawson's M47. Mitchell glanced at Lawson. I was under the impression the M47 was disabled beyond repair. Lawson cleared his throat. The turret ring is damaged, and the main gun stabilization system is offline, but the engine is intact and the gun itself can still fire, albeit with reduced accuracy. My crew is working to make it combat-worthy again. Air support? Mitchell asked, turning back to Patterson. Negative. Cloud cover moving in will ground our aircraft until morning at the earliest. Artillery? Limited. We have 1 battery of 105s that can reach this position, but they're supporting multiple units along the line. Don't count on them for more than occasional fire missions. Mitchell absorbed this information, his mind already calculating odds and options. The situation was dire, but not hopeless. He'd faced worse at Bastogne with even fewer resources. Very well, sir. We'll hold the hill. Patterson studied Mitchell's face for a moment, then nodded. I know you will, Captain. He hesitated, then added, about this morning's operation. I want you to know that I've submitted a full report to division, including your objections to the assault plan. Mitchell kept his expression neutral. Thank you, sir, but as I told Sergeant Carter, what's done is done. We have more pressing concerns now. Indeed we do, which brings me to my next point. Patterson glanced at Lawson. Captain Lawson will be returning to his tank once repairs are complete, but given the circumstances, I'm placing you in overall tactical command of the defense, Captain Mitchell. Your experience is what we need right now. Mitchell couldn't hide his surprise, nor could Lawson hide his discomfort with the decision. But the younger captain merely nodded in acceptance. Thank you for your confidence, sir, Mitchell said. I'll do my best to justify it. I know you will. Now outline your defensive plan for us. Mitchell moved to the map, his mind already formulating the strategy they would need to survive the night. Given our limited resources, a traditional static defense won't work. We'll be overwhelmed by superior numbers. Instead, I propose a mobile defense in depth. His finger traced lines on the map. We placed the infantry in 3 defensive lines here, here, and here with interlocking fields of fire covering the likely approach routes. Patterson nodded. And the tanks? We positioned them behind the infantry in hold-down positions where possible. When the enemy attacks, we let the infantry thin their numbers, then counterattack with the tanks from multiple angles. Hit and fade tactics. The M47, Lawson asked? Mitchell considered for a moment. Once operational, we'll position it here, at the center of our second defensive line. Its heavier armor will serve as an anchor point, and its more powerful gun can engage targets at longer ranges than our M46s. Lawson nodded, seemingly satisfied with the role assigned to his tank. Patterson studied the plan, then looked up at Mitchell. It's risky. If the enemy breaks through our lines, we could lose everything. Every defense is risky, sir, but this gives us the best chance to offset their numerical advantage. We can't match them tank for tank, but we can make them pay dearly for every meter of ground. After a moment's consideration, Patterson nodded. Very well, Captain. The defense is in your hands. I'll be monitoring from the command post and coordinating any support that becomes available. Sir, Mitchell said, his voice firm, there's one more thing. If the worst happens, if it becomes clear the position can't be held, I need authority to order a withdrawal. Patterson's expression hardened. I told you, Captain, this hill must be held at all costs. And we'll do everything humanly possible to hold it, sir. But I won't sacrifice men needlessly if the position becomes untenable. Better to withdraw in good order to a fallback position than to lose everything here. The 2 officers locked eyes, a test of wills that Lawson watched with evident discomfort. Finally, Patterson relented. Very well. You have the authority to withdraw if absolutely necessary, but only as a last resort, Captain. Is that understood? Perfectly, sir. Thank you. As the meeting concluded, Lawson approached Mitchell. A word in private, Captain? They stepped outside the bunker into the gathering darkness. The air had grown cooler, carrying the scent of coming rain. I wanted to say, Lawson began, his voice uncharacteristically subdued, that you were right this morning about the ambush. I should have listened to your assessment. Mitchell studied the younger man's face. Gone was the cockiness, the certainty that had characterized him earlier. In its place was something new, humility, perhaps, or at least the beginnings of wisdom. We all make mistakes, Captain Lawson. What matters is whether we learn from them. I've learned, Lawson said quietly. 7 men paid for my lesson with their lives. I won't forget that. Mitchell nodded, recognizing the weight of command settling on the younger officer's shoulders. Good, now, channel that into what lies ahead. Your men need you to be focused, not dwelling on what can't be changed. You've been doing this a long time, haven't you? Leading men into battle, making these kinds of decisions. Too long, perhaps. This is my last mission, Captain Lawson. After Korea, I'm hanging up my uniform for good. Lawson seemed surprised. I didn't know. I'm sorry if I... He trailed off, uncertain how to continue. Don't be. We all have our paths to walk. Yours is just beginning. Mine is coming to its end. Mitchell looked out over the darkened landscape. Now we should both get back to our men. It's going to be a long night. As they parted ways, Mitchell couldn't help but reflect on the change in Lawson. Perhaps there was hope for the younger officer after all. War had a way of stripping men down to their essence, revealing what they were truly made of. Some broke under the pressure. Others, like Lawson seemed to be doing, found a strength they didn't know they possessed. Mitchell made his way back to where his tank crew was waiting. They had gathered near Steel Thunder, sharing a meal of field rations as they prepared for the night ahead. Captain on deck, Carter announced as Mitchell approached. At ease, Mitchell said, waving away the formality. Save your energy for the fight. The men relaxed, but their expressions remained serious. They knew what was coming. What's the word, sir? Anderson asked, voicing the question on all their minds. We hold the hill, Mitchell replied simply, against everything they throw at us. Johnson, the young driver, looked around nervously. Just the 3 tanks, sir? Against their whole regiment? Mitchell smiled grimly. 4 tanks, actually. Captain Lawson is getting the M47 back in action, and yes, against their whole regiment. But we've got something they don't have. What's that, sir? Wilson the loader asked. Better men inside our tanks. Mitchell looked each crew member in the eye. I've fought alongside the best tankers in the U.S. Army across 2 wars now, and I can tell you without reservation that this crew, this right here, is as good as any I've ever seen. The men straightened slightly at the praise, pride evident in their postures. Now, Mitchell continued, all business. I want you all to get some rest. We'll work in shifts through the night. Anderson, you and I will take first watch. Johnson, Wilson, Carter, you sleep now. We'll wake you in 4 hours. As the others sought what comfort they could find for a few hours of precious sleep, Anderson followed Mitchell to a vantage point overlooking the valley. "You really think we can hold, sir?" Anderson asked quietly once they were alone. Mitchell didn't answer immediately. He scanned the darkness below where enemy forces were gathering like storm clouds on the horizon. "I think," he said finally, "that we can make them pay so dearly for this hill that they'll remember the name of the 64th Armor Brigade for generations to come." Anderson nodded, understanding what wasn't being said. Their chances were slim, but they would do their duty regardless. It was the Tank Corps way. One more battle, Mitchell mused, almost to himself. One more time into the breach. "Sir?" "Shakespeare. Henry the Fee. Once more unto the breach. Dear friends, once more, or close the wall up with our English dead." Mitchell smiled ruefully. Appropriate, don't you think? Before Anderson could respond, a flare burst in the sky above the valley, casting an eerie green light over the landscape. In that momentary illumination, they saw the advancing shapes of T-34 tanks, at least a dozen in the first wave, moving up the slope toward their position. "It's starting," Anderson said grimly. Mitchell was already in motion. "Sound the alarm. Wake everyone. Get to your positions." As Anderson ran to alert the others, Mitchell took one last look at the advancing enemy. Then he turned and hurried towards Steel Thunder, where he would make his stand. The night erupted in chaos as the first wave of North Korean T-34s reached the outer perimeter. American infantry opened fire with rifles, machine guns, and bazookas, their muzzle flashes creating a deadly light show across the darkened hillside. The tanks responded with their main guns and coaxial machine guns, turning the night into day with explosive fury. Mitchell stood in this commander's hatch of Steel Thunder, coordinating the defense via radio while scanning for targets. The tank was positioned behind a small rise, offering protection to the hull while allowing the turret and gun full freedom of movement. "Thunder 3, target advancing on your position, 2 o'clock, Mitchell called into the radio. "Thunder 3 identified, engaging." The distinctive boom of an M46's 90mm gun joined the cacophony of battle, followed by the bright flash of a direct hit on a T-34. The enemy tank slewed sideways, smoke pouring from its engine compartment, but its turret continued to traverse, seeking targets. "Hit but still operational," Mitchell warned. "Take it out before it finds you." Thunder 3 fired again, this time striking the T-34's turret and silencing it permanently. The battle continued this way for nearly an hour, the American defenders holding their ground against the first enemy assault. The combination of infantry anti-tank weapons and the 3 operational M46 tanks managed to destroy 7 T-34s while losing only a handful of infantry positions. But Mitchell knew this was just the beginning. The first wave had been a probing attack, testing their defenses and looking for weaknesses. The main assault was yet to come. During a brief lull, Carter approached Steel Thunder with a radio message. "Sir, Lieutenant Colonel Patterson wants a situation report." Mitchell climbed down from the tank to take the handset. "Thunder 1 to Eagle 6. First enemy assault repulsed. 7 tanks confirmed destroyed. Light infantry casualties." "Understood, Thunder 1, Tehran. Be advised, intelligence reports the enemy is regrouping for a larger assault, likely within the hour. Artillery support is available for 1 fire mission when you need it." "Copy that, Eagle 6. We'll advise when artillery is required." Mitchell handed the radio back to Carter, then looked around at their defensive positions. The infantry had performed well, holding their lines and using their bazookas effectively against the enemy tanks. But several positions had been overrun, creating potential gaps in their defense, and ammunition, especially for the anti-tank weapons, was running low. "Dave," Mitchell said to Carter, "find Lieutenant Parker. Tell him to shore up our left flank. We've got gaps in sectors 3 and 4. As Carter hurried off, Mitchell turned to find Sergeant Wilson approaching. "Ammo status, Doc?" Mitchell asked, using Wilson's nickname. 52 rounds of 90mm left, sir. 31 armor-piercing, 21 high-explosive, for all 3 tanks combined. Mitchell did the quick mental math. Not enough for a prolonged engagement. Distribute it evenly among the tanks, and make sure every shot counts. "Yes, sir, and Captain Lawson reports the M47 will be operational within 30 minutes. They've got the turret manually traversing and the gun functioning, though without the stabilizer." "Good. Tell him to position it where we discussed, anchoring the second line." Wilson nodded and hurried off to relay the orders. Mitchell turned back to survey the battlefield, using his binoculars to study the enemy positions in the valley below. They were indeed regrouping, forming up for what would clearly be a much larger assault than the first. He could make out at least 15 T-34s, with more likely hidden in the darkness. "They're coming in force this time," Anderson observed, joining Mitchell at the vantage point. "Yes, they are, and they've learned from the first attack. Look how they're positioning their tanks to provide overlapping fields of fire." Anderson studied the enemy formations through his own binoculars. "They're good, but so are we." Mitchell nodded, appreciating his gunner's confidence. "Better make your way back to the tank, Bobby. It won't be long now." Before Anderson could respond, the distinctive whine of incoming artillery shells filled the air. Both men dove for cover as the first rounds impacted near their position, showering them with dirt and debris. "Enemy artillery!" Mitchell shouted over the deafening explosions. "Get to the tank!" They ran through the barrage, dodging from one shell crater to another as the hillside erupted around them. By the time they reached Steel Thunder, the artillery had shifted its focus to the infantry positions on the forward slope. "Everyone in," Mitchell ordered, sliding into his commander's position as Anderson climbed into the gunner's seat. Wilson and Johnson were already at their stations, with Carter manning the radio. The interior of the tank was cramped and hot, smelling of gun oil, sweat, and cordite from the earlier fighting. Each man moved with practiced efficiency, checking systems and preparing for action. "Driver, move us 10 meters left, behind that rocky outcrop," Mitchell directed. "Gunner, scan for targets, prioritize any tank approaching the infantry positions." Steel Thunder lurched into motion, the powerful engine rumbling as Johnson skillfully maneuvered the 46-ton vehicle into its new position. From here, they had an excellent field of fire covering the most vulnerable section of their defense. The enemy artillery continued for nearly 20 minutes, walking back and forth across the American positions in a methodical attempt to soften their defenses. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the shelling stopped, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. "Here they come," Carter warned, monitoring the radio reports from the forward infantry positions. Mitchell peered through his periscope, scanning the darkness below. Then he saw them dozens of T-34s advancing up the slope, accompanied by waves of infantry. This was no probing attack. This was the full force of the 115th Armor Regiment, committed to taking Hill 468 at any cost. "All tanks, this is Thunder 1, Mitchell called over the radio. "Hold fire until they reach the first defense line. Make every shot count." The minutes ticked by in tense silence as the enemy forces drew closer. Mitchell could hear the rumble of their engines now, feel the vibration through the ground. The lead T-4s were less than 500 meters away, approaching the first line of infantry defenses. "Steady," Mitchell cautioned. "Wait for my signal." At 400 meters, the American infantry opened fire, their weapons blazing in the darkness. The leading edge of the enemy attack slowed as infantry fell, but the T-34s continued their inexorable advance. "All tanks, fire at will. Gunner, target lead tank center mass." Anderson was already on target, the gun tracking smoothly as he made final adjustments. "Target acquired. Fire!" Steel Thunder rocked back with the recoil as the 90mm gun roared. A heartbeat later, the lead T-34 erupted in flames, its ammunition cooking off in a spectacular secondary explosion that briefly illuminated the entire battlefield. "Target destroyed, acquiring new target. 3 more coming up the draw on the left," Mitchell directed, scanning continuously through his periscope. The battle quickly escalated to a fever pitch. All across the hillside, American and North Korean forces clashed in a desperate struggle. The defensive lines bent but did not break, bolstered by the supporting fire from the M46 tanks. And when Captain Lawson's M47 finally joined the fray, its more powerful 90mm gun proved devastating against the T-34s. For a time, it seemed the defenders might hold, but the sheer weight of the enemy attack began to tell. One by one, infantry positions fell silent as they ran out of ammunition or were overrun. The perimeter began to shrink as the defenders were pushed back toward the summit of Hill 468. "Thunder 2 is hit," came the frantic radio call. "Evacuating crew." Mitchell swung his periscope toward the position where the second M46 had been stationed. The tank was burning fiercely, its crew scrambling to escape as enemy infantry closed in. "Doc, load he," Mitchell ordered. "Driver, move us to supporting position. Carter, tell Thunder 3 to cover the crew's escape." Steel Thunder lurched into motion, racing to a new position from which they could fire on the enemy infantry, threatening the escaping tank crew. He loaded. "Target enemy infantry, near the burning tank. Fire." The high explosive round detonated among the advancing North Korean soldiers, scattering them and giving the American tank crew precious seconds to reach safety. But the situation was deteriorating rapidly. Another infantry position fell silent, then another. The defensive perimeter was collapsing inward, with enemy forces advancing from multiple directions. Mitchell made a quick decision. All units, fall back to the second defensive line. Repeat, fall back to the second line. Thunder 3 and Sabre 1 provide covering fire. As the remaining infantry retreated to the prepared positions on the second line, Thunder 3 and Lawson's M47 laid down suppressive fire, their main guns and machine guns sweeping the advancing enemy forces. Steel Thunder took up a new position at the center of the second line, where it could support both flanks. Mitchell emerged from the hatch to get a better view of the overall situation, despite the risk from enemy fire. What he saw was not encouraging. At least 8 enemy tanks had broken through the first line and were continuing to advance. Enemy infantry swarmed up the hill in seemingly endless waves. And on the right flank, where the terrain provided less natural protection, the second line was already beginning to buckle. Mitchell dropped back into the tank. "Carter, get me Lieutenant Colonel Patterson. Thunder 1 to Eagle 6, second line under heavy pressure. Request immediate artillery support on these coordinates." Mitchell rattled off the grid references marking the heaviest concentrations of enemy forces. "Copy that, Thunder 1. Artillery inbound, 5 minutes." Those 5 minutes felt like an eternity as the battle raged on. Steel Thunder continued to engage targets, Anderson's accurate fire accounting for 2 more enemy tanks. But for each one they destroyed, another seemed to take its place. Finally, the distinctive whistle of friendly artillery shells cut through the chaos of battle. Moments later, the forward slopes of Hill 468 erupted as the 105mm shells found their marks among the advancing enemy forces. The artillery barrage provided a brief respite, disrupting the enemy attack and forcing their tanks to seek cover. Mitchell used the opportunity to reorganize what remained of their defense. "All units consolidate positions. Infantry, report ammunition status." The reports were grim. Ammunition was critically low across all units. The surviving infantry had enough small arms ammunition for perhaps another 30 minutes of sustained combat, but anti-tank weapons were nearly exhausted. The tanks were down to their last 15 to 20 rounds each. As the artillery barrage lifted, the enemy attack resumed, but with noticeably less momentum than before. The artillery had done its work, destroying or damaging several tanks and inflicting heavy casualties on the infantry. But the North Koreans still held the numerical advantage, and they were pressing it relentlessly. "Thunder 3 is hit!" The radio call came just as Mitchell spotted the M46 taking a direct hit to its turret. Unlike the previous tank loss, there was no crew evacuation this time. The catastrophic impact had likely killed everyone inside instantly. "Carter, tell Lawson to shift his position to cover that sector," Mitchell ordered, his voice tight but controlled. "Driver, move us to supporting position." As Steel Thunder repositioned, Mitchell took stock of their situation. 2 M46s lost, leaving only his tank and Lawson's damaged M47. Infantry strength reduced by nearly 50%, ammunition running low across all units. By any rational assessment, Hill 468 could not be held much longer. It was time to consider the option Patterson had reluctantly granted him the authority for a fighting withdrawal. Before he could issue the order, however, a new threat emerged. Through his periscope, Mitchell spotted a group of 3 T-34s maneuvering around the American left flank, using a small gully for cover. If they broke through, they would be behind the defensive line, able to attack the defenders from the rear. "Gunner, traverse left! Enemy tanks in the gully!" Anderson swung the turret smoothly, bringing the gun to bear on the new threat. "I see them, sir. Range 800 meters and closing. Load AP target lead tank." AP loaded. "Fire when ready." Anderson took a breath, made a tiny adjustment, and squeezed the trigger. The gun roared, sending another 90mm shell downrange. The lead T-34 took the hit squarely in the side where its armor was thinnest. It shuddered to a halt, smoke pouring from the impact point. "Hit! Traversing to second target." But before Anderson could engage the second tank, a flash of movement caught Mitchell's attention. A 4th T-34, previously unspotted, was emerging from behind a small rise, its gun already trained on their position. "Evasive action, hard right." Johnson reacted instantly, throwing the tank into a sharp turn, but they weren't quite fast enough. The enemy shell struck Steel Thunder on the left side of the hull, the impact throwing everyone inside against their harnesses. "Damage report," Mitchell called, recovering first. Left track damaged, Johnson reported. We've lost mobility on that side. Hull integrity, Mitchell demanded, knowing that a penetrating hit could be catastrophic. Hull holding, sir, Carter confirmed after a quick check. But we can't move effectively. Mitchell made a split-second decision. Gunner, stay on those tanks. Driver, do what you can with the right track. Everyone else, brace for impact. Despite their damaged state, Anderson managed to bring the gun to bear on the second flanking T-34. His shot struck the enemy tank's turret, causing it to spin wildly before grinding to a halt. But the third and fourth T-34s were still operational, and now they both had Steel Thunder in their sights. Mitchell knew they couldn't evade, not with a damaged track. Their only hope was to take out the remaining threats before they could fire. Loading last AP, Wilson announced, ramming the heavy shell into the breach. On target, Anderson reported, his voice steady despite the desperate situation. Fire! The gun roared again, and the third T-34 erupted in a ball of fire as the shell found its ammunition storage. But the fourth tank fired at almost the same instant. The enemy shell struck Steel Thunder directly on the turret ring, the point where the turret connected to the hull. The impact sent a violent shudder through the entire tank, and Mitchell heard the ominous sound of metal grinding against metal. Turret ring damaged, Anderson shouted. We've lost power traverse. Switch to manual, Mitchell ordered. Carter, help him crank the turret. As Carter moved to assist Anderson with the hand crank that could slowly rotate the turret in the absence of power, Mitchell assessed their situation. Steel Thunder was now effectively crippled immobile due to the damaged track, unable to quickly traverse its gun due to the damaged turret ring. They were a sitting target for any enemy tank that spotted them, and one had. The fourth T-34, having survived their exchange, was maneuvering for a better shot, one that would likely finish them off. Can we get on target? Mitchell asked urgently. Trying, sir, Anderson grunted, he and Carter straining at the hand crank to rotate the heavy turret. But it's moving too fast for us to track manually. Mitchell knew they needed a miracle, and sometimes in war, you had to make your own miracles. Doc, load he ordered Wilson. Aim for the ground in front of it, right in its path. Wilson looked confused but followed orders, loading one of their few remaining high-explosive rounds. Anderson, understanding Mitchell's strategy, made a slight adjustment to his aim. Ready! Fire! The shell exploded exactly where Mitchell had intended, directly in the path of the advancing T-34. The explosion didn't damage the tank, but it did exactly what Mitchell had hoped. It obscured the driver's vision with dirt and debris, causing him to momentarily slow and adjust course. That slight hesitation was all they needed. With Anderson and Carter straining at the hand crank, they managed to bring the gun to bear on the now slower-moving target. AP loaded, Wilson announced, having anticipated the need without being told. Fire! The shell struck the T-34 at the vulnerable joint where the turret met the hull, penetrating deep into the tank's interior. A moment later, the enemy tank erupted in flames, its ammunition cooking off in a spectacular explosion. The immediate threat neutralized, Mitchell took stock of their situation. Steel Thunder was severely damaged, barely operational. But they were still in the fight. Carter, get me a situation report from all units. The news wasn't good. The second defensive line was collapsing across most of the perimeter. Captain Lawson's M47 was still operational, but running critically low on ammunition. The infantry was being pushed back steadily, many units down to their last magazines. It was time to make the call Patterson wouldn't like. All units, this is Thunder 1. Begin phased withdrawal to final defensive line. I say again, withdraw to final defensive line. Infantry first, tanks will cover. As the surviving infantry began to pull back to the last prepared positions near the summit of Hill 468, Steel Thunder and Lawson's M47 provided what covering fire they could with their remaining ammunition. Carter, get me Eagle 6. Thunder 1 to Eagle 6. Second line breached in multiple sectors. Executing withdrawal to final defensive position. Request immediate reinforcement and resupply. Without it, the position cannot be held beyond dawn. Patterson's voice came back, tense but controlled. Understood, Thunder 1. Reinforcements are en route but will not reach you before morning. You are authorized to withdraw from the hill if the position becomes untenable. Mitchell was surprised by the change in orders, but there was no time to question it. Copy that, Eagle 6. Will advise if withdrawal becomes necessary. As the radio conversation ended, a new threat emerged. From his position in the commander's hatch, Mitchell spotted a column of enemy infantry working their way up a small ravine on their right flank, attempting to outflank the final defensive line. Carter, alert Captain Lawson, enemy infantry in the ravine to our right. His position has the best firing angle. But before Carter could relay the message, the distinctive sound of a tank gun firing came from Lawson's position. The M47 had already spotted the threat and was engaging with its coaxial machine guns, cutting down the advancing infantry. Mitchell allowed himself a moment of grudging respect for the younger officer. Despite his earlier mistakes, Lawson was proving himself a capable tanker when it mattered most. With the infantry's flanking attempt thwarted, the battle settled into a brief lull as both sides regrouped. Mitchell used the opportunity to check on the status of his crew. "Everyone all right?" he asked, looking at each man in turn. Anderson nodded, his face streaked with sweat and grime. "Fine, sir, just wondering how we're going to get this crippled beast up to the final line." It was a valid concern. With one track damaged, Steel Thunder couldn't climb the slope to the summit where the final defensive positions were located. "We'll hold here," Mitchell decided. "Provide covering fire for as long as we can. Johnson, see if you can get us some more mobility with the remaining track." As Johnson worked to adjust the tension on the undamaged track, hoping to gain some limited maneuverability, Mitchell continued to scan the battlefield. The enemy forces were regrouping for what would likely be their final push. Despite heavy losses, they still outnumbered the defenders significantly. "Sir," Carter called. "Captain Lawson on the radio." Mitchell took the handset. "Thunder 1. Mitchell, this is Lawson. I'm down to my last 5 rounds. What's your ammunition status?" "About the same. 4 AP, 2 HE. Not enough to stop what's coming." Lawson's voice was grim but steady. "I've been monitoring their radio communications. They're bringing up at least 10 more tanks for the final assault." Mitchell absorbed this information without comment. 10 more tanks against their 2 damaged ones, with barely enough ammunition for half that number. The odds were beyond grim. "Any word on those reinforcements?" Lawson asked. "Not before morning, if we're still here." A moment of silence on the radio, then, "I have an idea. It's risky, but it might buy the infantry time to complete their withdrawal." "I'm listening." "They think they have us on the run? What if we show them otherwise? A counterattack, or at least the appearance of one. My M47 still has decent mobility. If I advance down the eastern slope while firing, it might make them think reinforcements have arrived. Could disrupt their assault preparations." Mitchell considered the suggestion. It was indeed risky, borderline suicidal for the tank executing the maneuver. But it might just work, especially if timed correctly. "Not alone," Mitchell decided. "We'll coordinate. Your M47 takes the eastern approach, visible and aggressive. Meanwhile, I'll try to get Steel Thunder into position on the western ridge. They won't be expecting an attack from that direction, given the terrain." "Can your tank make it there with the damaged track?" "Johnson thinks he can get us enough mobility for one more major movement. After that, we're likely immobile for good." "It's settled then, on your signal, Captain." As they finalized the details of their desperate gambit, Mitchell couldn't help but appreciate the irony. Just hours ago, Lawson had been the brash newcomer, disdainful of Mitchell's experience and caution. Now they were planning a high-risk counterstroke together, with the younger officer fully aware of what it might cost. "Carter," Mitchell said after the radio conversation ended, "inform the infantry commanders of our plan. Tell them to be ready to use the disruption to complete their withdrawal to the final line." As Carter relayed the orders, Mitchell turned to the rest of his crew. "This is going to be rough. Once we reach the ridge, we'll have at most 6 shots before we're out of ammunition. Make every one of them count." The men nodded solemnly. They understood what was at stake. "For what it's worth," Mitchell added, "I couldn't have asked for a better crew. It's been an honor serving with each of you." Johnson looked up from his driver's position. "We're not done yet, sir." Mitchell smiled grimly. "No, we're not by a long shot." With preparations complete, Steel Thunder began its laborious journey toward the western ridge, the damaged track causing the tank to move in an awkward, lurching motion. Every meter was a struggle, the engine straining as Johnson coaxed the wounded giant across the difficult terrain. From his position in the commander's hatch, Mitchell could see the enemy forces completing their preparations for the final assault. At least a dozen T-34s were visible, with more likely hidden in the darkness. Time was running out. "Almost there," Johnson reported through gritted teeth, fighting the controls to keep the tank moving. Finally, they reached the position Mitchell had selected, a small depression on the ridge that offered some protection for the hull, while allowing the turret a clear field of fire. "Thunder 1 to Sabre 1, Mitchell radioed to Lawson. "In position." "Sabre 1 copies. Ready on your mark." Mitchell took a deep breath, surveying the enemy positions one last time. This would be his final battle action, one way or another. After 20 years of war, it would end here, on this nameless hill in Korea. Execute, he ordered simply. Immediately, Lawson's M47 burst from its concealed position on the eastern slope, engine roaring as it charged down toward the enemy assembly area. Its main gun fired, striking one of the T-34s and destroying it instantly. The coaxial machine guns blazed, cutting down infantry and creating the impression of a major counterattack beginning from that direction. The enemy response was immediate and predictable. Tanks and infantry turned to face the perceived threat, commanders shouting orders as they scrambled to reorient their forces. That was when Steel Thunder made its move. With Anderson on the gun and Wilson loading their precious few remaining rounds, they opened fire on the now exposed flank of the enemy formation. The first 90mm shell caught a T-34 completely by surprise, striking it from an angle its commander had thought safe. The tank erupted in flames, secondary explosions indicating a catastrophic ammunition cook-off. "Target destroyed," Anderson called, traversing to next target. But manual traversing was painfully slow. By the time they had the gun aligned on their second target, the enemy was beginning to realize they faced threats from two directions. Several T-34s began to turn their turrets towards Steel Thunder's position. "Fire," Mitchell ordered the instant Anderson reported being on target. The second shell found its mark, disabling another T-34. But now they were taking fire in return. Enemy shells began to impact around their position, showering the tank with dirt and debris. "Keep firing," Mitchell urged. "Don't let them zero in on us." The third and fourth shots were fired in quick succession, each finding their targets with deadly accuracy. Anderson's skill as a gunner was proving invaluable in these desperate moments. Meanwhile, Lawson's M47 was conducting its own lethal dance, weaving between enemy tanks and firing at point-blank range. The newer tank had already accounted for 3 enemy vehicles, sowing confusion and panic in the North Korean ranks. The gambit was working. The enemy assault had been disrupted, their neat formations broken into chaos as they tried to respond to attacks from multiple directions. The American infantry used the opportunity to complete their withdrawal to the final defensive line, establishing a tight perimeter around the summit of Hill 468. But success came at a price. Lawson's M47, having expended its last rounds, was now surrounded by enemy infantry who swarmed over the tank like ants. The crew fought them off with pistols and the tank's machine guns. But it was a losing battle. "Mitchell!" Lawson's voice came over the radio, nearly drowned out by the sound of small arms fire. "We're overrun. Can't hold them off much longer." "Abandon the tank," Mitchell ordered. "Withdraw to the final line if you can." "Negative, too many of them. We'll hold them here as long as possible. Just make it count." Before Mitchell could respond, the radio went silent. He could still see Lawson's M47 in the distance, surrounded by enemy soldiers, its machine guns still firing in defiant bursts that grew increasingly sporadic. "Sir," Wilson reported grimly, "last AP round loaded." Mitchell nodded, feeling the weight of command pressing down on him like a physical force. One shot left, and Lawson and his crew sacrificing themselves to buy time. It had to count for something. Scanning the battlefield, Mitchell identified the most threatening target, a T-34, that had broken through the chaos and was advancing directly toward the final defensive line, where the surviving infantry waited with their few remaining anti-tank weapons. "Target advancing T-34, heading for the summit," Mitchell directed. "It's our last shot. Make it perfect." Anderson, understanding the gravity of the moment, took extra care with his aim, making minute adjustments to ensure the shot would be true. "On target," he reported, his voice steady despite the pressure. "Fire!" The last armor-piercing shell left the barrel of Steel Thunder's 90mm gun with a thunderous roar. Time seemed to slow as Mitchell watched its trajectory through his periscope, willing it to find its mark. The shell struck the T-34 precisely where intended, at the junction of turret and hull, penetrating deep into the tank's interior. A moment later, the enemy tank erupted in a spectacular explosion, its ammunition detonating in a chain reaction that tore the vehicle apart. "Direct hit! Target destroyed!" But there was no time for celebration. Without ammunition for its main gun, Steel Thunder was effectively out of the fight as an offensive weapon. And the enemy, though disrupted, was regrouping. More T-34s were moving up, and Lawson's M47 had finally fallen silent, overwhelmed by the enemy infantry. "Carter," Mitchell ordered, "radio Lieutenant Colonel Patterson. Inform him that the final line is established but cannot hold without immediate reinforcement. Request permission to withdraw the surviving infantry before dawn." As Carter made the call, Mitchell continued to assess the situation. The counterattack had bought them valuable time, perhaps even enough for the remaining infantry to slip away under cover of darkness if the order came soon. But it had cost them dearly. Lawson and his crew were almost certainly lost, and Steel Thunder, despite still being operational, was both immobilized and out of main gun ammunition. "Sir," Carter reported, returning from the radio, "Colonel Patterson authorizes full withdrawal. All remaining forces are to disengage and fall back to the secondary defensive line at grid point Bravo 7. Mitchell nodded, feeling a complex mixture of emotions. Relief that the men would have a chance to escape. Regret at abandoning the hill they had fought so hard to defend. Pride in what they had accomplished against overwhelming odds. "Relay the order to all infantry units," he instructed Carter. "Tell them to withdraw in sequence, starting with the most exposed positions. We'll cover them with our machine guns for as long as possible." As the withdrawal began, with small groups of infantry slipping away into the darkness, Mitchell gathered his crew for what might be their final counsel. "We can't move the tank," he stated plainly, "and someone needs to stay behind to cover the infantry withdrawal with the machine guns." The men exchanged glances, understanding what their captain was saying. "I'll stay, sir," Anderson volunteered immediately. "I can operate the machine guns alone." "No need for more than one," Wilson agreed. "The rest of us should go with the infantry." Mitchell shook his head. "I'll stay. The rest of you will withdraw with the last infantry group." "With respect, Captain," Carter interjected, "that's not happening. None of us is leaving you behind." Johnson nodded in agreement from the driver's seat. "We came in together, we leave together, or we stay together." Mitchell looked at the faces of his crew, men he had led through months of combat, who had become more like family than subordinates. He knew argument would be futile. They had made their choice. "Very well," he conceded. "We stay and cover the withdrawal, but we don't sacrifice ourselves needlessly. Once the infantry is clear, we disable the tank and follow on foot." The crew nodded, satisfied with this compromise. For the next hour, Steel Thunder provided covering fire with its coaxial and hull-mounted machine guns, suppressing enemy infantry that tried to pursue the withdrawing Americans. The tank's position on the ridge made it an effective final guardian for the retreat, even without its main armament. Finally, the last group of infantry passed their position, heading for the fallback point. It was time for the crew of Steel Thunder to make their own escape. "Prepare to disable the tank," Mitchell ordered. "Johnson, set the engine to overheat. Wilson, remove the breech block from the main gun. Carter, destroy the radio. Anderson, prepare the thermite grenades for the gunsight and periscopes." Each man moved to his assigned task, working quickly to ensure that nothing of value would fall into enemy hands. When they were done, Steel Thunder would be an empty shell, useless to anyone who captured it. As they worked, Mitchell took a final look through his commander's periscope at the battlefield below. Hill 468, which they had fought so hard to defend, was now firmly in enemy hands. T-34 tanks moved freely across its slopes, and enemy infantry swarmed like ants over the abandoned defensive positions. But they had exacted a terrible price for the hill. At least 15 T-34s lay destroyed or disabled across the battlefield, many still burning in the pre-dawn darkness. Hundreds of enemy infantry had fallen to American guns and artillery. And most importantly, the bulk of the defending force had escaped to fight another day. Not all had escaped, however. Mitchell's gaze lingered on the burnt-out hulk of Lawson's M47, surrounded by the bodies of enemy soldiers who had died taking it. The younger captain had redeemed his earlier mistakes with his final, selfless action. Mitchell made a silent promise to ensure that sacrifice was recognized, if he himself survived to report it. "Captain," Carter called softly, interrupting Mitchell's thoughts, "we're ready." Mitchell nodded, taking one last look around the interior of Steel Thunder, the tank that had been his home and fortress through so many battles. Then he gave the order that every tanker dreaded. "Abandon tank." One by one, they slipped out through the bottom escape hatch, choosing this less visible exit over the top hatches that would expose them to enemy observation. Last to leave, Mitchell took a final moment to run his hand along the cold steel of the turret. "Goodbye, old girl," he whispered. "You served us well." Then he was out, crawling through the darkness to join his crew in the shallow gully they had selected as their escape route. Together, the 5 men began their perilous journey toward the American lines, leaving behind their disabled tank as the first light of dawn began to brighten the eastern sky. The war wasn't over, not by a long shot, but for Captain James Mitchell and the crew of Steel Thunder, the final mission was drawing to its close. Whether they would reach safety Only the coming day would tell. But they had done their duty, held the line as long as humanly possible, and given their comrades the chance to fight another day. As they moved through the pre-dawn darkness, Mitchell thought of Margaret and Claire, waiting for him back home, of apple trees bearing fruit, and the peaceful life that might still await him if they could just make it through this one last trial. Keep moving, he encouraged his men softly. Just keep moving. Ahead lay uncertainty. Behind them, Hill 468 smoldered under enemy occupation, a testament to both defeat and defiance. And somewhere in between, Captain James Mitchell and his loyal crew sought a path home, their war not yet quite finished, but its end finally, mercifully in sight. The first hints of dawn broke over the eastern hills, casting long shadows across the Korean landscape. Captain James Mitchell and his four-man crew moved silently through a narrow ravine, their figures hunched and watchful. Behind them, Hill 468 stood occupied by enemy forces, the disabled hulk of steel thunder, a silent monument to their desperate night battle. "Hold up," Mitchell whispered, raising his hand. The men froze instantly, years of combat discipline evident in their immediate response. For 30 seconds, no one moved. Mitchell's experienced ears had caught something, a faint metallic click from somewhere ahead. He scanned the terrain carefully, eyes narrowed against the growing light. "Enemy patrol," he breathed, gesturing toward a rocky outcropping 50 yards ahead. At least 6 men. They were cut off from the American fallback position, caught between the hill they'd abandoned and the enemy forces now spreading out to secure the surrounding area. Their situation was precarious at best. Anderson, the gunner, eased forward to Mitchell's position. "Options, sir?" Mitchell considered their predicament. 5 men armed only with sidearms and 2 carbines they'd salvaged from abandoned positions. Low on ammunition, no radio contact with friendly forces, and less than a mile from an enemy-occupied strongpoint swarming with North Korean troops. "We can't go forward, and we can't go back," he concluded quietly. "We'll have to move east, parallel to the main road, then circle around to reach our lines." Carter, the radio man, looked concerned. "That'll add at least 5 miles to our journey, sir." "Can't be helped. Better a long walk home than a short walk to a POW camp." The men nodded grimly. All of them had heard stories about what happened to American prisoners. Extended captivity in North Korea was not a fate any of them wished to experience. As the patrol ahead moved on, Mitchell led his crew deeper into the ravine, following its natural curve eastward. The going was slow and difficult, the terrain rocky and uneven. By mid-morning, they had covered less than 2 miles, and fatigue was beginning to set in. 10-minute break, Mitchell ordered, finding a sheltered spot beneath an overhanging rock formation. "Johnson, keep watch." While Johnson, the driver, took up a position with one of the carbines, the others gratefully slumped to the ground. Wilson, the loader, produced a canteen and passed it around. They had only the 2 canteens among them, and no food beyond a few chocolate D-ration bars. "Think they'll send someone looking for us, Captain?" Carter asked, taking a careful sip from the canteen before passing it on. Mitchell considered the question. "Patterson knows we stayed to cover the withdrawal. Once the infantry reports in without us, he'll probably send a patrol, but they'll be looking along the main withdrawal route, not out here." "So we're on our own," Anderson said. It wasn't a question. "For now," Mitchell confirmed, "but we've got clear weather, daylight, and we know where we're going. I've been in worse spots." The men exchanged glances. They'd all heard stories about Mitchell's exploits during World War II, cut off behind German lines for 3 days near Bastogne, leading his crew back through enemy territory in the dead of winter. If anyone could get them home, it was their captain. The respite ended abruptly when Johnson gave a low whistle, the danger signal. Everyone tensed, hands moving to weapons. "Aircraft," Johnson reported, "coming this way." They pressed themselves against the rock wall as the distinctive roar of jet engines grew louder. A moment later, a formation of F-86 Sabre jets streaked overhead, heading toward Hill 468. "Ours," Mitchell confirmed, watching as the jets began their attack run. "Looks like Patterson called in air support." They watched as the American fighters strafed the hill, their guns chattering in the distance. Bombs fell, sending plumes of smoke and debris into the morning sky. The North Koreans were paying a heavy price for their conquest. "Wish we could have held out until they arrived," Wilson remarked, watching the air strike with mixed emotions. Mitchell shook his head. "Wouldn't have made a difference, not against that many tanks. We did what we could." He stood, brushing dust from his uniform. "And we're not done yet. Let's move out." They continued eastward through the increasingly difficult terrain, forced to backtrack several times when the ravine ended in impassable rock walls. By noon, they were all exhausted, their canteens empty, their uniforms soaked with sweat under the Korean sun. When they finally emerged from the ravine onto more level ground, Mitchell called another halt to get his bearings. They were in a small clearing surrounded by scrubby trees, with hills rising to the north and east. According to his map, they were approximately 4 miles from where the American lines should be, assuming those lines hadn't moved during the night's fighting. We'll rest here for 30 minutes, he decided, then make a push for our lines before dark. The men settled into the sparse shade, grateful for the break. Mitchell moved a short distance away, studying the map and formulating their approach. He was so focused that he nearly missed the subtle signs of movement in the trees to their left. Almost too late, his combat instincts screamed a warning. "Down!" he shouted, diving for cover as the first shots rang out. A burst of automatic weapons fire tore through the clearing, sending splinters flying from the trees around them. The 5 Americans scattered, seeking whatever cover they could find. "North Korean patrol," Carter called out, having caught a glimpse of their attackers. "At least a squad." Mitchell had found position behind a fallen tree, his .45 caliber sidearm drawn but held in reserve. The enemy had them outgunned and possibly surrounded. Returning fire would only confirm their positions unless they could make each shot count. "Anderson, Carter, hold your fire unless you have a clear shot," he ordered. "Johnson, Wilson, try to work around to their right flank. We need to break contact and get out of here." But before Johnson and Wilson could move, a new sound joined the chaos, the distinctive thump of mortar rounds being launched. "Incoming," Mitchell warned. The first mortar shell landed 30 yards away, showering them with dirt and debris. The second landed closer. The enemy was walking their fire toward the Americans' position, using the mortars to flush them out into the open where the riflemen could pick them off. Mitchell knew they had only moments before they were either hit by the mortar fire or forced to flee into the waiting guns. They needed a diversion. "Anderson, use the carbine, suppressing fire on my mark." Mitchell quickly reloaded his pistol, then pulled the single grenade he'd been carrying from his belt. "When this goes off, everyone move southeast. 20-second intervals. I'll go last." He pulled the pin, waited for the next mortar round to impact, then stood and hurled the grenade toward the enemy position. "Now!" Anderson opened fire with the carbine, the shots providing cover as the grenade arced through the air. It landed among the trees where the enemy was positioned, detonating with a satisfying crump. Cries of alarm and pain followed. "Go, go, go!" Mitchell ordered. One by one, the men broke from cover, sprinting southeast as Mitchell had directed. Carter went first, then Wilson, then Johnson. Anderson provided a final burst of covering fire before he too ran, leaving Mitchell alone. The captain waited exactly 20 seconds, listening as the enemy recovered from the grenade and began to pursue his men. Then he rose and sprinted in a different direction, directly east, hoping to draw attention away from the others. It worked. Shouts in Korean followed by a barrage of small arms fire tracked his movement. Mitchell zigzagged through the trees, bullets spitting dirt at his heels and splintering bark around him. At 68, he wasn't as fast as he once had been, but decades of combat had taught him how to move, when to duck, when to change direction. He led the pursuers on a chaotic chase, gradually angling his path to rejoin the route his men had taken. After 10 minutes of this deadly game, Mitchell found himself alone again, having successfully broken contact with the enemy patrol. Now he needed to find his crew. He moved cautiously through the unfamiliar terrain, alert for any sign of friend or foe. They had arranged no rendezvous point, but Anderson at least would understand Mitchell's intention to continue southeast toward friendly lines. An hour passed with no sign of the others. Mitchell began to fear the worst, that they had been captured or killed. But just as despair threatened to set in, he caught sight of movement ahead. Dropping to the ground, he watched carefully as a figure emerged from behind a large boulder. It was Anderson, signaling with a deliberately casual scratch of his head, an old recognition sign they'd used in the Ardennes. Mitchell returned the signal, then moved forward to join his gunner. "The others?" he asked immediately. "Safe, just over that rise." Anderson pointed to a small hill ahead. "We found something you should see, sir." Mitchell followed Anderson over the hill and down into a small depression on the other side. There he found Carter, Wilson, and Johnson gathered around the battered form of a Jeep, an American Jeep, partially concealed under camouflage netting. "Found it abandoned," Johnson explained. "Looks like it hit a mine. Front axle's damaged, but the engine still runs." Mitchell examined the vehicle. The right front wheel was indeed mangled beyond repair, but otherwise the Jeep appeared salvageable. More importantly, it contained a functioning radio. "Carter, see if you can raise our lines on that," Mitchell ordered. "Everyone else, help me get this netting off. If we can't drive it out, we might be able to salvage some supplies." As Carter worked the radio, the others cleared away the camouflage netting. Beneath it, they discovered a cache of supplies: ammunition, rations, medical supplies, and extra water. Someone had clearly been using the disabled Jeep as a forward supply dump. "Sir," Carter called excitedly, "I've got contact, Battalion HQ, weak but readable." Mitchell took the handset. "Thunder 1 to Hammer Base. Do you read?" Through static, a voice responded. "Thunder 1, this is Hammer Base. We read you 5 by 5. What is your status?" "Hammer Base, Thunder 1 and crew are on foot, approximately 4 miles east of Objective 468. Request extraction or coordinates for nearest friendly position." "Thunder 1, hold for Colonel Patterson." A moment later, Patterson's voice crackled through the radio. "Mitchell, is that really you? We thought you were dead." "Not yet, Colonel. My crew and I abandoned our disabled tank and are making our way back on foot. We've encountered enemy patrols and need direction to friendly lines." Patterson's relief was palpable even through the static. "Thank God. Listen carefully. There's been a significant enemy breakthrough south of your position. Our lines have pulled back to Rally Point Charlie. I'm sending you the coordinates now." Mitchell wrote down the coordinates as they came through, then checked them against his map. The news wasn't good. The American forces had withdrawn nearly 10 miles, much further than he'd anticipated. "Colonel, that's at least 15 miles from our current position. On foot? Through enemy territory." "I know, Mitchell, I am sorry, but I can't risk sending a rescue party that deep behind enemy lines, not with the situation so fluid." Patterson paused. "However, there is one piece of good news. Captain Lawson is alive." Mitchell couldn't hide his surprise. "Lawson, but we saw his tank overrun." "He and his gunner managed to escape during the confusion, made it back to our lines just before dawn. He told us what you did. The counterattack that saved the infantry withdrawal, said he wouldn't have made it without you." Mitchell absorbed this information silently. So the young captain had survived after all. Good. Perhaps he'd learned something from their brief time together. "Colonel, will make it for Rally Point Charlie. Expected arrival time 0800 tomorrow, assuming no further enemy contact." "Understood. I'll have a welcome party waiting. And Mitchell, good luck." The radio fell silent. Mitchell turned to his waiting crew, their faces expectant. "We've got a long walk ahead of us, gentlemen. Friendly lines have pulled back to Rally Point Charlie." He pointed to the location on his map. "About 15 miles from here, through territory that may or may not be occupied by enemy forces." The men exchanged glances, but no one voiced the obvious concern. 15 miles was a long way to travel on foot, through hostile country, with minimal supplies and the enemy actively searching for them. "So we start walking," Anderson said simply. Mitchell nodded. "We start walking, but first let's gather everything useful from this Jeep. Food, water, ammunition, medical supplies. The more we can carry, the better our chances." They spent the next 30 minutes salvaging what they could from the disabled vehicle. Each man filled a makeshift pack with supplies, distributing the weight as evenly as possible. When they were done, Mitchell disabled the radio to prevent it from falling into enemy hands. "Ready?" he asked, looking at each man in turn. They nodded, faces determined despite their fatigue. Mitchell felt a surge of pride in these men who had stood by him through the worst of the fighting and now faced an equally daunting challenge without complaint. "Then let's go home." The journey that followed tested them all. They moved southeast, keeping to ravines and forested areas where possible to avoid detection. Twice they were forced to hide as enemy patrols passed nearby. Once they lay motionless for nearly an hour as a North Korean tank company rumbled past on a parallel road. Night fell, bringing cooler air but increased difficulty in navigation. Mitchell set a grueling pace, knowing that their best chance lay in covering as much ground as possible before dawn brought renewed enemy activity. They stopped only for brief rest periods, eating cold rations and rationing their water carefully. By midnight, they had covered nearly 8 miles, but the strain was beginning to show. Johnson developed a limp from a twisted ankle. Carter's breathing became labored from the exertion. Even Anderson, the fittest of them, moved with the stiffness of extreme fatigue. When they reached a small stream around 2 in the morning, Mitchell finally called a longer halt. 3 hours rest, he announced. We need to conserve some strength for tomorrow. The men collapsed gratefully, using their packs as pillows. Mitchell assigned watch rotations, taking the first himself despite his own exhaustion. As the others slept, he sat with his back against a tree, pistol in hand, listening to the night sounds and thinking of home. Margaret's face came to him, as it always did in quiet moments. 23 years of marriage, most spent apart because of his service. She had never complained, never asked him to leave the army, even when it meant raising Claire largely on her own. He owed her so much, years of companionship sacrificed to duty. This time, he promised silently, would be different. This time, when he returned home, it would be for good. No more deployments, no more separations. Just the quiet life they had always talked about, but never quite managed to achieve. If he returned home, Mitchell pushed the thought away. Doubt was a luxury he couldn't afford, not with 4 lives depending on his leadership and judgment. When Anderson relieved him at the watch, Mitchell settled into a soldier's sleep, light and alert to danger even in rest. It seemed he had barely closed his eyes when Wilson was shaking him awake. "Captain," the loader whispered urgently, "dawn in 30 minutes. Mitchell was instantly alert. "Everyone up, we move in 5. They resumed their journey as the first light began to filter through the trees. Mitchell estimated they had another 7 miles to go, a challenging but achievable distance if they maintained their pace and avoided enemy contact. But Korea had other plans for them. As they crossed a small ridge around mid-morning, the distinctive sound of tank engines reached them from the valley below. Mitchell signaled for everyone to take cover, then crawled forward to assess the situation. What he saw made his heart sink. A column of T-34 tanks, at least a dozen, was moving along the road that cut through the valley, and they were headed in the same direction as the Americans, directly toward Rally Point Charlie. "Reinforcements," Mitchell murmured. "They must be planning another attack on our lines." He returned to where the others waited. "Change of plans. We need to warn Patterson about what's coming his way." "The radio's back at the Jeep," Carter reminded him. "I know. So we will have to move faster than those tanks. There's a ridge line that runs parallel to the road." Mitchell indicated the feature on his map. "If we follow it, we can stay out of sight while making good time. Might even beat them to our lines." It was their only option. The 5 exhausted men set out again, pushing themselves beyond normal endurance. The ridge provided good concealment but difficult terrain, steep in places, with loose rocks that threatened twisted ankles or worse. By early afternoon, they had gained ground on the tank column, which was forced to move slowly due to the poor condition of the road. But the exertion was taking its toll. Their water was nearly gone, their rations depleted, and the summer heat beat down mercilessly, sapping what little strength remained. When Johnson stumbled and fell for the 3rd time, Mitchell called a brief halt in the shade of a large boulder. 5 minutes, he said, no more. The men slumped to the ground, breathing heavily. Johnson examined his ankle, which had swollen noticeably since his earlier injury. "I'm slowing us down, sir," he said grimly. "Maybe I should stay behind, try to catch up later." Mitchell shook his head firmly. "No one gets left behind. We started together, we'll finish together." "But sir, the warning—" "We'll get through," Mitchell assured him. "All of us, or none of us. That's how it's always been in my command, and I'm too old to change now." The others nodded in agreement. Despite their exhaustion, none would consider leaving a comrade behind. "Here," Wilson said, tearing a strip from his already tattered shirt. "Let me wrap that ankle. It'll give you some support." As Wilson worked, Mitchell moved a short distance away, studying the terrain ahead. According to his map, they were now less than 3 miles from Rally Point Charlie. The tank column was still on the road below, maintaining its steady progress toward the American lines. It would be close. Very close. When the 5 minutes were up, Mitchell helped Johnson to his feet. The driver winced but nodded that he was ready to continue. They moved out again, with Anderson now supporting Johnson when the terrain became particularly difficult. The final miles were a blur of pain and determination. Each step became an act of will, each breath a conscious effort. But Mitchell kept them moving, his own indomitable spirit serving as both compass and engine for the group. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the landscape, they finally crested a hill and saw it in the distance, the distinctive pattern of American defensive positions, the silhouettes of M46 Patton tanks dug in along a low ridge. "There it is," Mitchell said, his voice hoarse from thirst and fatigue. Rally Point Charlie. They had made it, but so had the enemy tank column, which was now deploying from the road into attack formations less than a mile from the American lines. "We're too late," Carter said, despair evident in his tone. They're already in position. Mitchell studied the situation with a tactical eye. The enemy tanks were indeed preparing for an assault, but they were still maneuvering, not yet ready to attack, and they appeared unaware that their movements were visible from this vantage point. No, Mitchell decided, we're not too late, but we need to move now before they launch their attack. The final approach to the American lines was perhaps the most dangerous part of their journey. They had to cross open ground visible to both friendly and enemy forces, without being mistaken for the enemy by their own side or spotted by the North Koreans deploying nearby. Mitchell led them down from their position, staying low and using what little cover the terrain provided. As they drew closer to the American perimeter, he ordered everyone to remove their helmets and wave their arms when challenged, to clearly identify themselves as friendly forces. They were less than 500 yards from the perimeter when a machine gun opened fire, not at them, but at the North Korean tanks, which had apparently begun their advance. The battle was starting. Run, Mitchell ordered. Straight for our lines, now. Exhaustion forgotten, the 5 men sprinted across the open ground as artillery began to fall, and the full fury of battle erupted around them. Shells exploded, machine guns chattered, and the roar of tank engines filled the air. Somehow, miraculously, they reached the American lines unscathed. Hands reached out to pull them over the sandbag fortifications and into relative safety as bullets zinged overhead. Captain Mitchell? A young lieutenant stared at them in disbelief. Colonel Patterson said you might make it back, but with the attack starting... Where's the colonel? Mitchell interrupted. Command post, second bunker on the right. Mitchell turned to his men. Get to the aid station, all of you, especially you, Johnson, with that ankle. What about you, sir? Carter asked. I've got information the colonel needs. Go on, I'll join you soon. As his crew headed for the aid station, Mitchell made his way to the command bunker, dodging between positions as the battle intensified. Inside, he found Patterson bent over a map table directing the defense. Colonel, Mitchell announced himself, standing as straight as his exhausted body would allow. Patterson looked up, his eyes widening. Mitchell, thank God! He stepped forward to grasp Mitchell's hand. When the attack started, I feared the worst. We saw them deploying, sir, 12 T-34s plus supporting infantry. They're focusing their attack on your left flank, trying to find a weak point to exploit. Patterson nodded grimly. We've spotted them, engaging now with artillery and tank fire. He studied Mitchell's haggard appearance. You look like hell, Captain. Your men? All present and accounted for, sir. Headed to the aid station. Remarkable. Patterson shook his head in admiration. Absolutely remarkable. When Lawson told me what happened on that hill, I couldn't believe it. And now this, bringing your entire crew back through 15 miles of enemy territory. Mitchell shrugged. Just doing our job, sir. Far beyond the call of duty, Captain. Patterson's expression grew serious. I've already submitted you for the Silver Star for your actions on Hill 468. After this, I'm upgrading that to a recommendation for the Distinguished Service Cross. Mitchell was too tired to feel much response to this news. Thank you, sir, but right now I'd settle for a canteen of water and someplace for my men to rest. Patterson nodded, understanding. Of course, report to the aid station. Get yourself checked out, get some food and water. We'll talk more once this attack is dealt with. Mitchell saluted and turned to go, but Patterson called after him. Oh, and Mitchell, Captain Lawson was asking about you. He's over at the tank park coordinating repairs on some of our damaged vehicles. Said he had something important to tell you. Curious despite his fatigue, Mitchell made his way to the tank park after a brief stop at the aid station to check on his men. They were all being treated for dehydration and exhaustion, but would recover fully with rest. Johnson's ankle was sprained but not broken. Mitchell found Lawson supervising repairs on a battle-damaged M46. The younger captain's left arm was in a sling, and a bandage still covered the wound on his forehead, but otherwise he appeared to have recovered well from the battle for Hill 468. Captain Lawson, Mitchell called. Lawson turned, his face lighting with genuine pleasure. Captain Mitchell, they said you might have made it back, but with the attack starting. He stepped forward to shake Mitchell's hand with his good arm. It's damn good to see you, sir. The sincerity in Lawson's voice was a far cry from the cocky arrogance he had displayed when they first met. The battle had changed him, as combat often did. Heard you made it out from that mess on the hill, Mitchell said. Glad to see it. Lawson nodded soberly. Barely. Lost my gunner and driver. Only reason I'm alive is because of what you taught me about tank tactics. He paused. That's actually what I wanted to talk to you about. Oh? Colonel Patterson mentioned you're retiring after this tour. Lawson hesitated. I was hoping That is, I wondered if you might consider staying on, at least for a while, as an instructor. Mitchell raised an eyebrow, surprised by the request. The Army's changing, Lawson continued. New tanks, new tactics. But the men who'll be using them still need what you have. Real combat experience, leadership under fire. The kind of thing that can't be taught from a manual. Asking me to delay my retirement, Captain? Mitchell asked, a hint of amusement in his tired voice. Just for a while, 6 months, maybe a year. Long enough to pass on what you know. Lawson's expression grew earnest. I watched you on that hill, sir. The way you handled your crew, the way you adapted when everything went wrong. That's not technology, that's leadership, and we need more of it. Mitchell considered the request. For 20 years, he had dreamed of returning to civilian life, of the quiet farm and the peaceful days with Margaret. But Lawson had a point. The Army was changing, and not always for the better. Too much focus on technology, not enough on the men who used it. I'll think about it, he promised. But right now, all I'm thinking about is a hot meal and 12 hours of uninterrupted sleep. Lawson smiled. Fair enough, sir. As if on cue, the sound of the battle beyond the perimeter began to fade. The radio on Lawson's belt crackled with reports of enemy tanks withdrawing. The attack repulsed. Sounds like your warning helped, Lawson observed. Patterson had time to reinforce the left flank before they hit us. Mitchell nodded, too tired to feel much satisfaction. The adrenaline that had carried him through the past 24 hours was fading rapidly, leaving only bone-deep weariness in its wake. If you'll excuse me, Captain, he said, I need to check on my crew and then find somewhere to rack out. Of course, sir. Lawson hesitated, then added, when you do think about my request, consider that your radio man, Sergeant Carter, has put in for tank commander training. He'd benefit from your instruction before you leave. That gave Mitchell pause. Dave Carter, following in his father's footsteps, becoming a tank commander. The thought stirred something in him. Pride, responsibility, a sense of continuity. I'll definitely consider it, he said with more conviction. Back at the aid station, Mitchell found his crew being released, having received medical attention, food, and water. They looked better already, though still exhausted. Orders, sir, Anderson asked as Mitchell approached. Orders are to get some rest. All of you. We've earned it. And after that, Wilson asked? Mitchell smiled faintly. After that, we go home. All of us together. 5 days later, as the first rays of morning sun streamed through the window of the officers' quarters, Captain James Mitchell stood before a small mirror, adjusting the tie of his dress uniform. His reflection showed a man aged beyond his years by war, but with eyes that still held purpose and strength. A knock at the door interrupted his preparations. Enter, he called. Colonel Patterson stepped into the room, also in dress uniform. Almost ready, Captain. The ceremony begins in 20 minutes. Just about, sir. Mitchell gave his tie a final adjustment. Your crew is already assembled, and there's someone else waiting to see you. Patterson stepped aside, revealing a familiar figure standing in the doorway. Dave, Mitchell greeted Carter warmly. Shouldn't you be with the others? I'll join them in a minute, sir. Carter seemed uncharacteristically nervous. I wanted to speak with you privately first. Patterson nodded, understanding. I'll leave you two alone. 5 minutes, Captain. When the colonel had gone, Carter stepped fully into the room, coming to attention before his commander. At ease, Dave, Mitchell said. What's on your mind? Carter relaxed slightly but remained formal. Sir, I heard about Captain Lawson's request, that he asked you to stay on as an instructor. Mitchell raised an eyebrow. News travels fast around here. Yes, sir. Carter hesitated. I also heard that I was mentioned as one of the reasons you might consider it. That's right. Carter took a deep breath. I wanted you to know, sir, that while I'd be honored to learn from you, you shouldn't let that influence your decision. You've given enough to the Army, to all of us. If it's time for you to go home, then that's what you should do. Mitchell studied the young sergeant thoughtfully. Mark Carter's son had grown into a fine man, one his father would have been immensely proud of. Thank you, Dave. That means a lot. He placed a hand on Carter's shoulder. Whatever I decide, know that I'm proud of you. Your father would be too. Carter blinked rapidly, emotion briefly overcoming his military bearing. Thank you, sir. That means everything to me. Together, they walked to the parade ground where the ceremony was to take place. The entire battalion was assembled in formation, with Mitchell's crew and several other decorated soldiers standing at the front. Colonel Patterson waited on a small reviewing stand along with several other officers. As Mitchell took his place, he caught sight of Captain Lawson among the assembled officers. The younger man gave him a respectful nod, which Mitchell returned. Whatever their initial differences, they had forged a bond in battle that transcended rank and age. The ceremony was brief but moving. Colonel Patterson spoke of courage under fire, of leadership and sacrifice. He mentioned Hill 468 and the desperate delaying action that had saved countless American lives. Then he called Mitchell forward. For extraordinary heroism in connection with military operations against an armed enemy of the United States, Patterson read from the citation, Captain James Mitchell is awarded the Distinguished Service Cross. As the medal was pinned to his chest, Mitchell stood tall, thinking not of his own actions, but of the men who had served under him, those present today, and those who had not returned from hills and valleys across 2 wars. One by one, his crew were called forward to receive their own decorations. Silver stars for Anderson and Wilson. Bronze stars with valor devices for Carter and Johnson. Each man stood proudly as his medal was pinned on, each acknowledging Mitchell with respect as they returned to their places. When the ceremony concluded, Mitchell found himself surrounded by well-wishers, fellow officers, enlisted men who had served under him, even the battalion commander who had never quite approved of Mitchell's unconventional tactics. Eventually, he extracted himself from the crowd and made his way to where his crew waited. "Congratulations, gentlemen," he said simply. "Well-deserved, everyone." "Couldn't have done it without you, sir," Anderson replied, speaking for all of them. Mitchell shook his head. "Other way around, Bobby. I couldn't have done it without all of you." He looked at each man in turn. "It's been an honor serving with you, something I'll never forget, no matter where life takes me next." "About that, sir," Carter ventured. "Have you decided about Captain Lawson's request?" Mitchell smiled faintly. "I have." He turned to include all 4 men in his answer. "I've requested a 6-month extension. I'll be heading to Fort Knox next month to help develop the training program for the new M47 and M48 tanks." The men exchanged surprised glances. "But sir," Wilson said, "what about your retirement? Going home to your wife and daughter?" "Still happening, Doc. Just delayed a bit." Mitchell's expression grew thoughtful. "Margaret understands. She's not happy about it, but she understands. Some things are worth a small delay." "What things, sir?" Johnson asked. Mitchell looked at Carter, then at the other 3 men who had fought beside him, who had followed him through hell and somehow made it back. "Making sure the next generation of tankers has the best possible chance to survive what we went through. Making sure men like Sergeant Carter here have the knowledge they need when they take command of their own tanks." He paused. "And making sure that what we learned at such cost isn't forgotten just because technology changes." The men nodded, understanding. "Besides," Mitchell added with a rare smile, "I hear Fort Knox is nice in the fall, and it's a hell of a lot closer to home than Korea." Later that evening, as the sun set over the Korean hills, Mitchell stood alone on the small rise overlooking the camp. In the distance, he could see Hill 468, still in enemy hands, but no longer the crucial objective it had once seemed. From his pocket, he took a folded letter, the one he had written to Margaret on the eve of that final battle, the one he had thought might be his last communication with her. Now it would be replaced by a very different letter, explaining his decision to delay his homecoming for just a little longer. He knew she would understand. Margaret had always understood the call of duty that had defined his life for so long. As darkness fell, Captain James Mitchell turned away from the hill and walked back toward the camp, where men prepared for tomorrow's battles. His last mission had ended, but his service was not quite finished. There were still young men to teach, lessons to impart, wisdom earned in blood to be passed on. For a little while longer, the old soldier would continue to serve. And when he finally did hang up his uniform for good, he would do so knowing that he had given everything he had to give to his country, to his men, and to the future tankers who would never know his name, but would live because of what he had taught them. It was enough. It would have to be enough. In the gathering darkness, Mitchell squared his shoulders and walked with purpose toward the lights of the camp. One final mission. One last contribution to the army that had been his life for so long. And then at last home.